States is home to over 400 national parks. They cover 84 million acres of land. That is an area larger than many entire countries. We look at the beautiful photographs of the Grand Canyon, the towering redwoods, and the misty peaks of the Smoky Mountains. And we think of these places as massive playgrounds. We pack our tents, we fill our water bottles, and we walk down the well-marked trails, believing that nature is simply waiting to be explored. But the people who work in these parks know the truth. The forest is not a playground. It is a living, breathing entity, and it does not belong to us. When you step off the marked trail, you are stepping off the map of human civilization. You are entering a world that operates by very different, very ancient rules. Over the next 2 hours, we are going to explore the terrifying, unexplainable, and classified stories of the men and women who patrol the deepest parts of the American wilderness. The forest rangers. These are not campfire tales. These are the documented experiences of trained professionals. People whose entire job is to understand the woods. And these are the stories that made them never want to go back in. This is Chapter 1, The Stairs in the Deep. In the late summer of 2018, a veteran search and rescue ranger named Arthur was stationed in a massive, densely forested park in the Pacific Northwest. Arthur had 15 years of experience tracking lost hikers. He knew how to read footprints in the pine needles, how to spot broken twigs, and how to survive off the land. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the call came in. A 22-year-old college student named Mark had vanished. He was supposed to be on a simple day hike on a popular, highly trafficked loop, but he never returned to his car. Arthur and a team of 6 other rangers deployed immediately. They established a search grid radiating outward from Mark's last known location. For the first 2 days, they found nothing. No footprints, no discarded wrappers. It was as if the young man had simply evaporated into the thin mountain air. On the 3rd day of the search, Arthur was assigned to cover a sector known as the Black Ridge. It was a steep, heavily wooded area completely off the official trail system. The terrain was brutal. Thick, thorny underbrush and massive, rotting fallen trees made every step a physical battle. Arthur was hiking alone, about 5 miles away from the main trail. He was communicating with base camp every 30 minutes via his heavy-duty shoulder radio. The deeper he pushed into the Black Ridge, the more the environment began to change. The trees here were older, their trunks covered in thick, pale green moss. The canopy above was so dense that it blocked out the afternoon sun, casting the forest floor in a permanent twilight gloom. Around 2 in the afternoon, Arthur noticed the first strange thing. The sound of the forest had completely died. Usually, even in the deep woods, there is constant background noise. The rustling of wind through the leaves, the chirping of squirrels, the distant call of a crow. But here, the air was dead perfectly still. It was a suffocating, heavy silence, the kind of silence you feel pressing against your eardrums. Search and rescue teams call this the Oz effect, a sudden, unexplainable drop in all environmental noise, as if you have just stepped into a soundproof room. Arthur unclipped his radio to check in with base camp. He pressed the transmit button. Base, this is Arthur. Do copy. Instead of the usual burst of static or a voice response, the radio emitted a sound he had never heard before. It was a low, rhythmic, wet, clicking sound, like teeth snapping together in the dark. He tried changing the frequency, but the clicking just grew louder. He turned the radio off completely, clipping it back to his vest. He was alone. He kept moving forward, his hand resting instinctively on the grip of his bear spray. 10 minutes later, he broke through a thick patch of thorny bushes and stepped into a small, natural clearing. What he saw in the center of that clearing made him stop dead in his tracks. Standing in the middle of the dirt, completely disconnected from any building or structure, was a staircase. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't made of rotting wood or covered in vines. It was a perfectly clean, freshly painted flight of white wooden stairs. It looked like it had been ripped directly out of a modern suburban home and dropped into the middle of the untamed wilderness. There were exactly 13 steps leading up to a small, carpeted landing, and there was absolutely nothing else around it. No foundation, no walls, just the stairs leading up to empty air. Every instinct in Arthur's body screamed at him to turn around and run. Veteran rangers have an unspoken rule about the deep woods. If you see something that does not belong, you do not look at it, you do not approach it, and you certainly do not touch it. But as Arthur began to slowly back away, he saw something on the top landing of the stairs. It was a bright blue nylon backpack. It was the exact make and model of the backpack the missing hiker, Mark, had been wearing. Arthur's training fought against his terror. His job was to bring the boy home. He drew a deep breath, fighting the crushing silence of the clearing, and took a slow step toward the isolated staircase. He didn't take his eyes off the blue backpack. He stopped about 10 feet away from the bottom step. He called out, his voice sounding thin and weak in the dead air. "Mark, are you there? This is the park ranger." For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, from the very top of the empty stairs, directly above the blue backpack, a voice answered. It was a young man's voice. It sounded exactly like the voice of the missing hiker from the voicemails the family had provided. But the tone was wrong. It was completely flat, emotionless, like a tape recorder playing back a captured sound. The voice from the top of the stairs said, "Help me. I broke my leg. Can you come up here and help me?" Arthur felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He was looking at the top of the stairs. There was no one there. The space above the landing was completely empty, but the voice was coming from right there in the empty air. Arthur took another step back. He said, "I can't come up there, Mark. You need to come down." The voice immediately responded, exactly the same flat tone, exactly the same cadence. "Help me. I broke my leg. Can you come up here and help me?" Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. It wasn't Mark. It was something mimicking him. Something that had taken his backpack, set a trap, and was now waiting for Arthur to step onto the wood. Then, the blue backpack on the top landing slowly began to slide across the carpet, pulled by an invisible hand toward the edge of the stairs. Arthur didn't say another word. He didn't turn his back to the stairs. He walked backward, step by step, until he was swallowed by the thick underbrush. And then he ran. He ran for 3 hours straight, tearing his uniform on the thorns, completely ignoring the burning in his lungs, until he finally broke through the tree line and collapsed onto the main trail. When he returned the next day with a fully armed search team and a GPS tracker, the clearing was empty. The stairs were gone. The backpack was gone. And the forest was filled with the normal sounds of birds and wind. Mark was never found. When we venture deep into the woods, we assume we are the apex predators. We assume we are the smartest things out there. But the forest is vast, and it is incredibly old. And out there, miles off the trail, there are things that know how to hunt us. Things that know exactly what bait to use. When we return in Chapter 2, we will explore the terrifying reality of the fire watch. What happens when your job requires you to sit alone in a glass box at the very top of the world, and you realize that the things in the dark are looking right back up at you? Welcome back. We left the solid ground of the deep woods, where the trees hide the things that watch us. But sometimes, being high above the forest floor doesn't make you safe. Sometimes, it just puts you on display. Fire lookouts are a unique breed of forest ranger. Their entire job is to sit in a glass box 60 feet in the air, perched on the highest peaks of the American wilderness. They spend months completely alone, scanning the endless ocean of green for the smallest wisp of smoke. They have no neighbors, no visitors, just a two-way radio and a panoramic view of absolute isolation. They are the eyes of the forest. But when you spend all your time looking out into the dark, you have to accept that eventually something in the dark is going to look back up at you. This is Chapter 2, The Glass Box. In the high summer of 2020, a 26-year-old rookie ranger named Alina took a post in the Bitterroot National Forest in Montana. Her station was called the Osprey Peak Lookout. It was an old wooden cabin surrounded by windows. Sitting on top of a rusted steel skeletal frame, 60 feet above the rocky ground. To get there, Alina had to hike for 2 days, carrying all her supplies. Her closest human contact was a ranger station over 40 miles away. For the first 4 weeks, the job was a dream. The sunsets were magnificent, and the silence was pure. But in late August, the weather shifted. A massive dry lightning storm moved into the valley. Dry storms are the nightmare of the fire watch. They bring massive electrical strikes with zero rain to put out the resulting fires. It was 11 at night. The wind was howling around the glass box, making the entire steel structure sway and groan. Alina turned off all the light inside her cabin. You cannot see the forest fires if your own reflection is in the glass. She sat in her swivel chair in the pitch black, watching the lightning tear across the sky. Every time a bolt struck, the entire valley would be illuminated in a stark, blinding white light for a fraction a second before plunging back into total darkness. Flash, Alina scanned the north ridge. Nothing but pine trees whipping in the wind. Flash, she checked the eastern slope. Clear. Flash. She looked straight down at the base of her own tower. The white light illuminated the small dirt clearing directly below her. Standing right at the edge of the tree line, looking straight up at her glass box, was a figure. The darkness slammed back down. Alina stopped breathing. She leaned closer to the freezing glass, her eyes straining against the pitch-black night. She told herself it was a bear standing on its hind legs, or a strange shadow cast by a broken tree branch. She waited for the next strike, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't an Apos, a bear. It was a person. But the proportions were entirely wrong. The figure was at least 7 feet tall, unnaturally thin, and its arms hung down past its knees. Its skin was completely pale, almost glowing in the brief electric light. And the head was tilted completely backward, staring directly up at Alina and Apos' window. Darkness returned. Alina scrambled backward, her chair scraping loudly across the wooden floor. She grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight and her two-way radio. She pressed the transmit button, her hand shaking violently. Dispatch, this is Osprey Peak. I have a trespasser at the base of my tower. I need immediate assistance, the radio hissed. The storm was heavily interfering with the signal. Through the static, she heard a voice reply, but it was in an Apos, the dispatcher. The voice on the radio was a low, rattling wheeze. It sounded like lungs full of dirt trying to force air out. And then the voice began to perfectly mimic the sound of Alina and Apos. S-chair, scraping across the floor. Scrape, scrape. The thing was an Appos. T, just watching her. It was listening to her dot flash. Alina looked out the window again. The pale, impossibly tall figure had moved. It was no longer at the tree line. It was standing directly at the bottom of the steel stairs that led up to her cabin. The figure slowly raised its unnaturally long, pale arm. It pointed a single, jointed finger directly at her. Darkness. Alina dropped the radio. She rushed to the heavy wooden trapdoor in the center of her floor, which was the only entrance to the glass box. She slammed the heavy iron sliding bolt into place, locking it from the inside. She dragged a heavy metal footlocker directly over the trapdoor for extra weight. She stood in the center of the dark room, surrounded by glass on all four sides, completely exposed to the storm. She gripped her flashlight like a weapon. Then she heard the first sound. It came from outside, below her. Clang. It was the heavy, metallic vibration of a footstep on the first steel grate of the tower stairs. Clang. The sound was slow, deliberate. The Osprey Peak Tower had exactly 60 steel steps leading up to the catwalk. Alina backed into the corner of the cabin, making herself as small as possible. She didn't and Appos. She knew that if she turned on the light, she wouldn't, and Appos T, be able to see out. But whatever was climbing the stairs would be able to see imperfectly. Clang. The heavy, metallic footsteps were echoing through the steel frame of the tower. The entire cabin vibrated slightly with every step it took. Alina started counting in her head, tears streaming down her face in the dark. 10 steps, 20 steps. The wind screamed against the glass, but it couldn't, and Appos T drown out the slow, rhythmic impact of those pale, heavy feet hitting the metal grating. 30 steps, 40 steps. It was getting closer. The sound was no longer coming from far below. It was coming from right under her floorboards. 50 steps. The footsteps stopped. Alina held her breath until her lungs burned. The storm outside seemed to hold its breath, too. Then, right beneath her boots, the heavy iron handle of the trapdoor began to turn. Squeak! The metal groaned against the rusted hinges. Something was pushing against the wood from the outside. The heavy metal footlocker she had placed over the door shifted an inch across the floorboards. Alina closed her eyes and raised her flashlight, ready to strike. Suddenly, a massive bolt of lightning struck a tree less than 100 yards away. The thunderclap was so loud, it shattered one of the glass panes on the north side of the cabin, blowing freezing rain and wind into the room. Alina screamed and covered her head. When she opened her eyes, the handle of the trapdoor had stopped moving. The metallic footsteps did not retreat down the stairs. They just ceased to exist. Alina sat in the corner of that freezing, shattered glass box until the sun finally broke over the mountains 8 hours later. When the emergency helicopter arrived to extract her, the rescue team found deep, parallel scratch marks gouged into the underside of the thick wooden trapdoor. The marks were so deep, they had almost splintered through to the inside. Alina resigned her post that morning. A fire watch tower gives you a 360-degree view of the world. It is supposed to make you feel like a god watching over the earth. But when you are trapped in a glass box in the sky, and the pale things come out of the trees, you realize you are not a god at all. You are just fish in a bowl. When we return in Chapter 3, we will leave the height of the fire towers and travel back down to the ground. But we won't be on the trail. We will follow the search and rescue teams into the places where the maps end and the real nightmares begin. Welcome back. We have seen the traps laid on the forest floor and the things that climb the steel stairs of the fire towers. But the most unsettling stories do not come from the people who sit still. They come from the people whose job is to walk into the unknown. The search and rescue teams. These men and women are the elite trackers of the wilderness. They know how to read a snapped twig or a scuff mark on a rock. But there are zones within the national parks that even the veteran trackers refuse to enter. They call them the forbidden zones. Unmapped, treacherous areas where compasses spin wildly, radios die, and the silence is absolute. This is Chapter 3, The Whistle in the Fog. In the autumn of 2015, a massive search operation was underway in the Great Smoky Mountains. An experienced hiker named Samuel had vanished from a popular ridge trail. He left all his camping gear at his site. The only things missing were his boots and his emergency whistle. A veteran search and rescue tracker named Greg was assigned to search a notoriously dangerous section called the Jagged Basin. It was a steep, bowl-shaped valley filled with dense, ancient forest and sharp limestone drop-offs. It was completely off-trail. Greg began his descent into the basin at dawn. The Appalachian Mountains are famous for their thick, white morning fog. But down in the basin, the fog was unnatural. It did not burn off as the sun rose. It clung to the ground like a heavy liquid, obscuring the roots and the treacherous sinkholes. By noon, Greg was 3 miles deep into the unmapped zone. The air was freezing. He stopped to check his compass. The needle was drifting lazily in circles, completely unable to find true north. The magnetic anomaly was strong here. He clipped his compass away and relied on his topographic map and his instincts. He reached a narrow ravine, flanked by sheer rock walls. That is when he saw it. Sitting on a flat rock in the middle of the ravine were Samuel's boots. Greg carefully approached. The boots were not thrown or dropped in a panic. They were placed perfectly side by side, facing the solid rock wall of the ravine. The laces were neatly tied. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just a pair of empty boots staring at a wall of stone. Greg unclipped his radio to report the finding. He pressed the transmit button. The radio was completely dead. Not even static, just empty silence. He was entirely alone in the fog. Standard search protocol dictates that a tracker must frequently sound their emergency whistle to signal lost hikers. 3 sharp blasts. It means, I am here. Where are you? Greg took a deep breath, raised his bright orange plastic whistle to his lips, and blew 3 sharp, piercing notes into the quiet forest. Tweet, TWEEEET .TWEEEET. The sound echoed off the rock walls, fading slowly into the thick fog. Greg waited. He listened to the absolute silence of the forbidden zone. 30 seconds later, a response came. TWEEEET .TWEEEET. TWEEEET. It was faint, coming from deeper inside the ravine, but it was unmistakable. 3 blasts. The universal call for help. Greg felt a surge of adrenaline. He yelled, "Samuel, I am coming. Stay where you are." He jogged forward, his boots slipping on the wet moss. He navigated through the thick fog for 10 minutes, heading directly toward the sound. The ravine grew narrower, the rock walls closing in until he had to walk sideways to squeeze through. He stopped and blew his whistle again. 3 sharp blasts. He waited. This time, the response was much closer. Less than 100 yards away, hidden in the fog ahead. TWEEEET. TWEEEET. Greg pushed through the final narrow gap of the ravine and stepped into a small, enclosed box canyon. It was a dead end. 3 solid walls of gray limestone towered 100 feet, straight up into the mist. There was no way out. The canyon was completely empty. Greg stopped. He scanned the rocky floor. There was nowhere to hide. If Samuel had blown the whistle from here, he would be standing right in front of him. Greg called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Samuel, where are you?" The fog swirled gently around his knees. There was no answer. Greg looked up at the sheer rock face. There were no ledges, no caves, nothing but solid, wet stone. He realized with a cold, sinking dread that the whistle blasts had not been an echo. An echo degrades. An echo sounds distant. The blasts he heard were crisp, clear, and perfectly timed. Something had mimicked his whistle perfectly to lure him into a dead-end canyon. And then, the fog directly behind him shifted. He did not hear footsteps. He did not hear breathing. He just felt an intense, freezing cold radiating against his back. The hairs on his arms stood straight up. The primal animal part of his brain screamed at him that he was standing inches away from an apex predator. Greg did not turn around. He knew that if he turned around, he would die. Right behind his left ear, so close he could feel the cold displacement of the air, a whistle blew. T-W-E-E-E-E-T. Just one single, deafening blast. Greg bolted. He threw himself forward, squeezing blindly through the narrow gap of the ravine, tearing his jacket on the jagged rocks. He ran through the thick fog, abandoning his search pattern, abandoning his protocol. He did not stop to look at the neatly placed boots. He did not stop to check his compass. He climbed the steep basin wall with bleeding hands, completely consumed by the raw terror of the hunted. He made it back to the command center 5 hours later, physically exhausted and mentally shattered. He refused to speak to anyone for 2 days. Samuel's body was never recovered. The search was officially called off a week later due to severe weather. When we send the search and rescue teams out into the wilderness, we are asking them to fight against nature. But the deep woods are not just trees and rocks. They are ancient territories. And when you walk into the forbidden zones, you have to understand that you are no longer the searcher. You are the prey. When we return for our 4th chapter, we will look at the ultimate terror of the forest. We will explore what happens when the things in the dark do not just mimic our tools. They mimic the voices of the people we love. Welcome back. We have encountered the stairs that lead to nowhere and the whistles that lure us into the fog. We have seen that the forest can mimic our structures and our tools. But the ultimate horror of the wilderness is when it begins to mimic the people we love. There is a psychological phenomenon called the uncanny valley. It is that deep, instinctual revulsion we feel when we see something that looks almost human but is just slightly wrong. But what happens when that phenomenon is auditory? What happens when you hear a voice that sounds exactly like your mother, your child, or your spouse, calling to you from a place where they cannot possibly be? In the folklore of the American Southwest and the deep Appalachian woods, there are legends of creatures that cannot speak their own words. They are scavengers of sound. They steal the voices of the lost and use them like bait on a hook. This is Chapter 4, The Voice in the Dark. In October of 2020, a senior forest ranger named Miller was performing a final seasonal sweep of a remote canyon in northern Arizona. The canyon was a 3-hour drive from the nearest paved road. It was a place of high red stone walls and ancient, twisted cedar trees. Miller was 55 years old. He had lived in the wilderness his entire life, He was not a man given to imagination or fear. He carried a heavy-duty sidearm, a satellite phone, and a lifetime of survival training. He was camping for the night at a designated ranger site on the canyon floor. The sun had set 2 hours ago, leaving the canyon in a deep purple darkness. The only light came from his small, crackling campfire and the cold stars overhead. Around 10 p.m., the wind died down. The canyon became unnaturally still. Miller was sitting by the fire, sharpening his field knife, when he heard it. A voice, coming from the thick darkness of the cedar trees, about 50 yards away from his camp. It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, frantic, and filled with a desperate, sobbing terror. The voice cried out, "Daddy, Daddy, please help me. I am lost, and I am so cold." Miller dropped his knife. His heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable. It was the voice of his daughter, Chloe. But Chloe was not in Arizona. She was 3,000 miles away, in her dorm room at a university in Boston. Miller had spoken to her on the phone only 4 hours ago. His training kicked in immediately. He reached for his high-lumen tactical flashlight. He told himself it was impossible. It was a hiker in distress. It was a woman who happened to sound like his daughter. He stood up and shined the bright beam of light into the trees. The light cut through the dark, reflecting off the red dust and the twisted branches. Nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. He called out, "Hello. I am a park ranger. Who is out there?" There was a long silence. The fire popped and hissed. Then the voice responded. It was closer now. Much closer, Daddy. I can see your light. Please, my leg is broken. It is so dark. Why won't you come get me? Miller felt a wave of nausea. The tone, the cadence, the way she slightly mispronounced the word darket was a perfect 100% replica of his daughter. It wasn't just a similar voice. It was her. He grabbed his radio. He wanted to call for backup, but he knew the canyon walls would block any signal. He was entirely alone. He began to walk toward the voice, his flashlight trembling in his hand. He kept the beam focused on the trees. He called out again, "I am coming to you. Keep talking so I can find you." The voice answered immediately, but this time the words were strange. "Daddy, I am coming to you. Keep talking so I can find you." Miller stopped. His blood turned to ice. The voice hadn't responded to him. It had repeated his own words back to him, using his daughter's voice. He stood perfectly still. He realized the voice was no longer coming from the ground. It was coming from about 10 feet up in the air, inside the canopy of a large cedar tree. He slowly raised his flashlight beam, moving it up the trunk of the tree. He expected to see a person, a woman, a hiker. Instead, The light hit something that his mind struggled to process. Perched on a thick branch was a creature. It was shaped like a massive, skeletal bird, but it had no feathers. Its skin was the color of raw, bruised meat. It had no eyes, only two large, wet holes in the front of its skull. And its mouth that didn't have a beak. It had a long, hinged jaw filled with rows of needle-thin teeth. The creature didn't flinch at the bright light. It didn't move. It opened its jaw, and from deep inside its throat, Miller's daughter's voice came out once more. "Daddy, why are you looking at me like that?" The creature then began to change the sound. It started to blend Miller's own voice with the daughter's voice, creating a distorted, overlapping harmony of terror. "I am coming to you. Why won't you come get me? Daddy, help me." Miller did not fire his weapon. He did not yell. He backed away, his eyes locked on the creature in the tree. He retreated to his camp, grabbed his pack, and began the 3-hour hike out of the canyon in total darkness. He didn't use his flashlight. He didn't want to show the thing where he was. He spent the entire night walking, listening to the creature following him from the cliff tops. Every 10 minutes, it would call out to him, sometimes using the voice of his daughter, sometimes using the voice of his deceased wife, sometimes using his own voice, screaming in pain. Miller reached his truck at dawn. He drove straight to the ranger station, turned in his badge, and left the state of Arizona that afternoon. He never spoke to his daughter about that night. He could never bring himself to tell her that something in the desert had stolen her soul and used it as a weapon against him. When we go into the woods, we think of the dangers as physical. We worry about bears or snakes or falling rocks. But the forest has ways of attacking the mind. It finds the frequencies of your deepest fears and it plays them back to you until you can no longer tell the difference between the wind and the screams. When we return for our final chapter, we will look at the grand summary of the wilderness. We will explore the forbidden zones, the unmapped disappearances, and the final warning every ranger is given on their first day. Welcome to the final chapter of our journey. We have spent the last 100 minutes traveling through the darkest corners of the American wilderness. We have seen the unexplainable stairs, the pale figures at the base of the towers, the whistles that lure us into canyons, and the voices that steal the souls of our loved ones. But there is one final piece of the puzzle, a secret that the authorities have spent decades trying to hide. Because when thousands of people vanish in our national parks every year, and many of them are never found, you have to ask yourself, why? Why are some areas of our parks permanently closed to the public? Why do the search and rescue teams sometimes receive orders to stop a search just when they are getting close? And why do the official maps of our government have certain zones marked in a deep blood red? This is Chapter 5, The Forbidden Map, In 2022, a retired high-level administrator for the National Park Service named Davis decided to speak out. Davis had spent 30 years working behind a desk in Washington, D.C., managing the logistics and the classified records of every park from Yellowstone to the Everglades. When he retired, he didn't just take his pension. He took a single, thin file that had been kept in a top-secret safe for over 50 years. Inside that file was a map of the United States, but it wasn't a map of trails or campgrounds. It was a heat map of disappearances. On this map, there were hundreds of tiny black dots representing people who had vanished without a trace. But more importantly, there were 16 large, circular zones shaded in dark red. These were the forbidden zones, areas where the concentration of disappearances was 500% higher than anywhere else on Earth. Davis explained that these red zones are not closed because of dangerous terrain or protected wildlife. They are closed because the government knows exactly what is living there. He described a rescue operation in the mid-90s in a red zone in Northern California. A group of hikers had vanished near a cave system. When the special response team entered the forbidden zone, they didn't find the hikers. They found a series of massive, underground structures built from a non-human stone. The air inside those structures was so cold it could freeze skin instantly, and the walls were covered in the same glowing carvings we saw in the depths of the Mariana Trench. Davis claimed that the government has a secret treaty with whatever resides in these zones. They allow these entities to remain undisturbed, and in exchange, the entities stay within the red circles. But the price of this peace is human. Occasionally, someone wanders off the trail. Someone ignores the warning signs. And when they enter the red circle, they are no longer under the protection of human law. This is the final warning given to every ranger on their first day of training. Stay on the trail. Keep your eyes on the trees, and never, under any circumstances, enter the red zones after sunset. Because we are not the masters of this land. We are just guests. And some of the hosts have been waiting for millions of years for us to make a mistake. The wilderness is a beautiful, terrifying mystery. It is the heart of our world, but it is a heart that does not beat for us. The next time you are out on the trail and you feel that sudden, cold chill on the back of your neck, the next time you hear a whistle in the fog that sounds just a little too perfect, the next time you see a flight of stairs where there should be only trees, do not look, do not stop, and do not go off trail alone. Thank you for surviving this 2-hour journey into the deep woods. If you have ever seen something in a national park that you cannot explain, leave a comment down below. Your story might be the key to unlocking the next mystery. If you made it to the very end of this mega documentary, you are a true survivor. Make sure to subscribe to Deep Story. Turn on the notification bell and give this video a like to support our deep dives into the unknown. Stay safe, stay on the trail, and I will see you in the next nightmare.